Hey YouTube, what's going on? Today we're going to talk about taking that alpha predator and making a custom Amengi figure so that he can kill it. And all that's going to happen in this video, including a little bit of conversation about the little minor adjustments we made to alpha, but that Amengi right there is what we're working on. So let's dive into the video. It's time for some alchemy.
Behold my stuff.
All right, so we picked up a Predator Alpha. I told you guys I wanted to build a Claude Van Damme Amengi, so I needed a base figure. I'm not paying NECA secondhand prices because NECA people suck and they charge an incorrect amount of money for secondhand figures. So the solution is go to AliExpress, get a bootleg. So I got a bootleg Scorpion Predator because the hollows in the leg I thought would be really cool. And it looked like a lot of the extras they had were able to be peeled off, which I can do with an X-Acto knife and a heat gun. And I also really liked the detail in the shoulders, the musculature, which did sort of match that original maquette drawing. So the first thing you got to do is you got to go in and rip the thing apart. So you notice that the legs are already off. I took the legs apart. Also, the ball joint between the lower body and the upper body was too long. So what I ended up doing was recycling an older ball joint from another NECA figure so that it would be tighter and a little bit more compact. So I'm cutting off all the extra Scorpion detail that was glued on that I didn't really want and I knew would be covered up anyway. I ripped the head apart into two pieces. I'm going to keep the crown and the lower jaw for a skull later. The lower part of the skull, I'm actually going to hack up and use as the base of my head. The biggest pain in the ass was the fact that the bootlegs use a very, very tacky glue to bond all the extra pieces in. So that was annoying. But once I get the pieces off the arms and all the things that I want, Dremel solves any of the other little issues that I had. But yeah, I really enjoyed ripping this thing to absolute shreds because it's a bootleg, so I feel no guilt whatsoever in doing that. So once I get these little arm bits off, I'll pretty much have it the way I want it, although I will decide that those shoulder flares are not going to cut it. So I'm going to cut those off too, because I know that I've got shoulder pads that have to go over the thing, and I just don't need all that, and the shoulder pads are going to cover all that anyway. So go ahead and just slice it off. Fortunately, the plastic they use is very soft, so it's actually really easy to cut. I don't know if regular NECA figures have that, but the bootlegs almost always do. I will cut the fingers short too later as well. I realize they're way too long. So now we're looking at the legs, seeing if there's anything I want to cut off, anything I want to rip off. For the most part, I like the legs, so I kind of leave them alone. We do a test fit of the armor. We're not going to keep the horns of power because after I watched Killer of Killers, I realized that those are the horns of power for the leadership. So I was like, oh, Mengis don't need that. So I'll take those out later. So we're doing just a quick sort of mock-up here. Like, all right, is this going to work? Is this going to be a thing? Will this do what I want? I very quickly came to the conclusion that I wanted the lower waist cut off, and I'll re-glue it later from the Amengi armor. Now I'm sort of messing with the legs. I popped the legs off entirely just to kind of get some ideas. Can I pull the skirt off? Things like that. But for the most part, I end up preserving a good amount of the Scorpion. The legs really weren't touched at all. I ended up doing no mods to the lower body and the legs at all outside that other peg. So this is going to be my base. And as you can see, it does not stand. And the reason it doesn't stand is because it's a knockoff. So that's kind of why I decided he's going to be posed laying down getting killed because I can't get the bastard to stand up. There was a brief period here where I was flirting with using the lower jaw from the Alpha Predator to make a custom head, but I very quickly found out that anchoring it needs something else. So I flat blacked the piece, and I used the other ball joint, as I said. Now I'm going to go in and mix some colors. Now I should say that I did flat black it, and I did do a really brief coating of Rub and Buff copper, but I knew that it didn't look insectoid enough. So we are going ahead and mixing iridescent green and iridescent like blue purple and we're going to go in and do a very wet coat to get a lot of the iridescence and the bug look, and then we're going to coat over this afterwards. So we're going to hope this works.
Now, I did not use a very well mixed version of the green and the blue. I sort of put them in and loosely mixed them together because I wanted the green and the blue to sort of be irregular. I didn't want it to be whatever those two colors blend into and creating like a muckiness. I just sort of wanted an unmixed, some lighting you catch some green, some lighting you catch some blue, some you catch some purple, and it just sort of is all over the place because that copper look I'm going to keep, and that's going to be the stronger color. I thought about going with the lighter color like the original maquette or the one that they had on set where, it has sort of like this Vorlon Babylon 5 paint job with organic textures and things like that. But ultimately I decided NECA put out the copper armor, and I was just going to stick with that look to a degree. I did put a little bit of the iridescence on the mask too, because again, like I said, I am going to go over that with, dry brush some copper rub and buff onto it again. So cover the whole thing up, and then before we know it, you can see how much the blue is really standing out. So I start leaning in a little bit more to the green, but I kind of know where the high points and low points are, so I want the low points to get all the iridescence because I know the high points are mostly going to be covered by copper paint. But in general, I was pretty happy with how this was turning out, and I kept moving it, sort of looking for like a cicada kind of look. The next step is going to be to cover this now in a wash of translucent red paint. The translucent red acrylic I'm using because I'm going to need some way to transition to the harshness of the copper. So by going over this with a little bit of red, this is going to allow me just a nicer segue, a little less harsh of a segue into the copper look. The iridescence is still going to come through. I'm not going to have too much of an issue with it. So what I'm doing is I'm going over the high areas where I know the copper is going to hit, and I'm letting that run just a little bit. So that way, when I do a dry brush, I don't have to hit 100% of the area with the copper. The red will transition enough between iridescence and that so that it just gives like a copper sheen. And it'll make sense when I've completely wrapped it up. So, all right. So now we're going to take some copper rub and buff. Now, unlike the gold and the silver, the copper you really have to mix. It separates hard, and it is very, very watery if you don't. So I highly recommend once you get it on a palette or something, mix it. You can try to mix it in the tube as best you can, but I found that the tube just breaks. So I like to mix it out of the tube a little bit. It's definitely the weakest of all the rub and buffs I've worked with, but it does the job, and I like it more than I like actual copper paint. So I'm taking... it's a makeup brush, and it's a blending brush. So it's thick and fuzzy, but it's rounded. And we're going to get some copper on this. And not a huge amount, but as you can see, I'm really trying to, mush it around. And then we're just going to start, and I'm going to go from the top down. I'm going to go from the mask down. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm debating if I want to go heavy on the copper up top and then iridescent more at the bottom. So I'm hoping as I go down, I just fade a little bit. So you're going to see a top-down situation here. And I'm just hitting high points, doing what you do when you dry brush. This is nothing new. I'm not trying to get into any of the small areas. That's what I don't want. I do not want to go in and cover up all that iridescence. I just spent all that time painting. And of course, I heat gunned it and dried it. Don't do this while that's wet, obviously. This will prevent the iridescence from shining through, so you don't want to be too heavy with it. You want to use just a little bit of it and then let that red covering the iridescent, which is translucent, shine through if you want more of that iridescent look. So I'm pretty sparing with the copper. It's just enough, and you can see how it pops right away. It's quite, in your face, like, hello. But I know the areas that I want it, and the main thing is I thought, in my head, I was thinking about, the color palettes that they used in Predator the movie. I wasn't wild about how the Jungle Predator shared so many color palettes with the actual jungle, which is why I think the final fight, when he's no longer cloaked, moved to that very rocky, not as leafy terrain, because you lose the Predator with all those browns and off-whites and yellows and things like that. So in my mind, I'm like, well, when the Predator decloaked, when they had designed it with Van Damme, and you see this very bright coppery thing, that's going to stand out really well in a green jungle. So that's why he needs the cloaking device, because it's super, super like a big cicada. Like, you would see that. You'd be like, oh, crap, there that is. So I really did like that look. And I also knew a little bit from the lore of Yautja Prime and things like that, that it's more deserty, kind of Colosseum-y and things like that. So I thought with the Alpha Predator being such a pale figure and having a little bit of green blood and everything, these coppers and blues and things would be a great contrast and it would display better. So I went with this color scheme. I noticed that other people have kept that sort of color scheme that NECA gave it. And I do like it. I think it, again, this is not going to be exactly what Van Damme's suit was. I may build up the neck later and work on that, but the goal of this is to just put together something that looks cohesive and put together something that at glance you'll be like, okay, this is the Amengi that the Yautja kill to make all their armor and stuff out of and take over. And so I just sort of went with a color scheme that I felt complemented what NECA had already come up with, and also one that sort of would make sense in the various dioramas that I put it in. If I ever put him in a jungle, he'll pop. If I ever put him in a desert, he'll pop. And if I put him with a white predator like Alpha, he'll pop. And if I put him with like the Marines or the infiltration unit, the rescue unit, he'll pop. So these colors to me give me the most flexibility of what I want to do with the thing. And if I ever decide I want to change it, I just spray paint the whole thing and then airbrush it and do the Vorlon look. So I can do that too.
All right. And once we have put in, that's why you don't buy bootlegs. Once we have done all that base coat and then we dry brush the copper over it, it just sort of creates this iridescent bug-like quality that I wanted to really stand out against the Alpha Predator, who's really, really pale. So, in general, I feel like this was a pretty good build. The legs are atrocious for posing. They just have no stability whatsoever. I want them to have this sort of buggy posture, but as you can see, they don't hold weight. They don't at all. So it's in that sense, it sucks. You could peg them, and he'll stand. I will go in probably and build in some structures around the neck, just so it doesn't look quite like that, because Jean-Claude Van Damme's head was supposed to be in there. I originally thought about maybe putting a Van Damme head in here, but there's no way I can make that work. So, but I'm happy with the look. I'm happy with the iridescent detail, sort of giving some quality to the overlaid metallic. Especially in the arms, you get a little bit of green, blue, and it just sort of creates a bug quality. I wanted it to be buggy, so I didn't want it to just be flat red copper. So yeah, he looks pretty good. And so this is kind of what I'm thinking for the diorama. As you can see, when he's standing there, ready to stab him, we went in and threw some green iridescent on our Alpha, because he's not going to be completely undamaged. I thought about maybe doing an orange iridescent and having that be the blood, sort of nod to the whole orange suit they had to wear to shoot the invisible scenes for this, because they did have a fully bright orange suit. So I thought it'd be kind of cool if the insect blood was sort of iridescent orange. I may still do that. I can mix that up pretty easily. So I'll think about it, and then I'll splatter some orange on him and whatnot, but you can kind of get the vibe here that Alpha's coming in, and he's gonna absolutely annihilate Amengi here. And now that I've gone in and put some of the blues and the greens in, it just pops a little bit more against Alpha. He does sort of have that really, really bug-like quality that I was going for. So I'm pretty happy, and this is kind of how this will play out as a diorama. So I'll throw it together. I have a dial that I could just kind of throw it on and do a quick thing. But yeah, this is the look. This is how this is gonna be. And this is the Amengi getting owned by Alpha, representing the sort of Spartacus uprising they did to become the Yautja. So that is what happens when you buy a cool figure and buy another cool figure and come up with an idea. You know, if you can't build it, you can buy it. If you can't buy it, you can build it. But if you do both, you get something cool, and it's pure gold.